Well, we're back with Sermon Extra. It's been a couple of weeks. I know we were going to come back last week, and I was out sick, and then that's just the way things go.
As you clear your throat, are you still
Yeah,
sick?
I know.
Yeah, come on.
I'm not contagious, guys. And then this Sunday was quite a Sunday. So it was fantastic to see how many people were in worship, to have the kids sing, to honor our veterans. And if you're at 8 o'clock, to see a little bit of chaos, a little panic in Pastor Dustin's eyes when the sermon slides went awry.
Technology's great when it works. So
It is. I thought I wanted to break this down a little so people understand the weird things that sometimes happen. So actually, Natalie was listening to your message, and she's like, I want to close our finals or change our final song. We've got a different one. It'll match so perfectly with what he's saying. And so she's in tune for that. So she tells us in the AV room, hey, we're going to change this song. So theoretically, I can go in to the program while you're handling your sermon slides and add a new song. Done it a million times. Did it this Sunday. All of a sudden, a huge error message pops up, and there's been a bug with this program I've been dealing with, and the people that made the program.
You want a song? I'll give you a song.
They have no clue. Right. All of a sudden, it's like, no. And I could tell he couldn't advance the slides. We could do nothing. I saw the spinning rainbow little ball of death. Yeah. So it's a quick restart the computer, knowing you have no clue what's going on. But I'm like, I got this. And it restarted quickly. We had control.
Jump back pretty quick.
Yeah, it was very fast. But then, as you discovered, I have no control. You have to trust us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've never paid closer attention to a sermon in a long time.
Well, it's like every time you start a sentence with theoretically, it's like, all right, this is not going to go well from here. This is something's
Yet so
wrong.
many are doing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In theory, it's safe to do this, but I can break things very well. But I can usually fix them quickly.
Theoretically, Mondays are just like other days. Wait, they're not.
They are not. So, but it was a wonderful service. It was it was a great morning.
It really was. And, and since we haven't been together, we've transitioned from joining Jesus on his mission. We finished that up on Reformation Day, and just reminding everybody, we want to entrench that language, that activity, that equipping into people's lives each and every day. So we're never going to let loose of that. We've transitioned into a new sermon series, of course, but it'll just be different ways of us speaking that same truth out.
And we have planned ways of keeping in front of people that they'll be learning about. So fear not, it's going to be in front of you more and more.
Absolutely. Stories keep coming in, too, of people that I heard one on Sunday had to do with buying turkeys. I didn't catch the whole story, but it was like buying turkeys. I think you were in on that, weren't you? And so it's just cool. People are like, hey, I have this story of how I joined Jesus on his mission.
That's
I thought that was really, really cool. So, but yeah, getting into the book of Ruth. And so.
Yeah, and I got to kick it off. Chapter 1, and you did a good job of keeping people moving from that to 2, kind of reframe some of the things that I didn't get as deep into too. And one thing that one of my good Hebrew scholar friends reminded me, I didn't say it incorrectly, but to clarify, Ruth obviously took place in the time of Judges. And I said it was written in the time of King David, which could be and is likely true. The conservative thought it was written during the reign of King David. Some believe during the time of King Solomon, but obviously that's quite a bit later, and that's going to come up in the next couple chapters why that's important. So it was obviously lived out during the time of Judges, and then later was written, several years later or a few years
So
later.
Just the difference between when it took place and when it was penned.
I said penned, but it may have been alluded to. It was during the time of King David's reign, but that's importantly not true.
Well, and I think again, not to go too deep into these weeds, but what's important to understand is all of Scripture is inspired by God. And so, Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. He obviously wasn't there at creation, and God inspired him to write the account. Yeah. And so it is not outside of God's purview to say, I'm going to have this penned, maybe not at the moment, because we don't know the author of Ruth. We don't know who the author is. But it's still inspired, so it doesn't take away from the authenticity or the account, at all. So anyway.
When you find out the connection of all that, specifically in chapter 4, it's going to all come together really in a cool way. So
Yeah.
Well, and just when you read Ruth, and I touched on this a little bit on Sunday, but it just reads like a 4-act play, and yet it's a true story. But obviously, like so much of Scripture, Genesis, passed on by oral tradition, obviously this is a story that would have been told. And
Yes.
to your point, Andy, there's a reason that David and his family would be telling this story too. So,
Yeah.
but no, it just getting back into the book of Ruth, and especially for us who understand the New Testament, to look back through this story and read it, knowing what Jesus does for us, it just brings this whole greater depth to it when you, you know, even where it takes place, Bethlehem, and what we come to know about this little town of Bethlehem, and then to know about, which I know chapter 3 will get into it more, but the whole idea of this redeemer and kinsman redeemer, and what we touched on yesterday, just the hesed, this kindness that English translators just like, we don't know what to do with this word because there's so much to it. So how do we communicate it? But we see that being lived out in God then too, this unconditional, just amazing kindness and favor attached to grace. And so it's so much powerful imagery throughout the story.
There is.
A couple connections too that you and I's messages made from chapter 1 and chapter 2. One, you mentioned this. I really hammered on the fact that Naomi said, "Don't call me Naomi anymore," because she was bitter. She said, "Call me Mara," and that really her tone changes greatly
By the end of chapter 2.
by the end of chapter 2. And a part of that was you also touched on, and I guess more in Ruth, but God was working the whole time, and Naomi and Ruth didn't know how. They knew they were going back home. And they were going to see what happens next, but really they had no idea. And now we start to see, there's a little bit of a plan starting right here in chapter 2. So I'd mentioned kind of the question mark, and you started to answer it in chapter 2, which is really cool.
And it all just so happened, right?
Yeah, I like that. I like the wink. The wink.
I was like, how do you explain what's going on here? And I think it's like the author's like winking at us.
Yeah.
Like,
And I was looking at, I don't know Hebrew well yet, but I like to look at certain words, and it was, she did not know. She did not have an idea at the time. It was a unknowing. She was seeking a field that she didn't know at the time. It said there was an innocence about the field she found. Was kind of what the Hebrew spoke to, which is really cool.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about the whole thing with gleaning, it was for the poor. It was for the unemployed. It was for those who didn't have the support structure around them to go into the fields and actually cultivate and raise their own grains and things like that. And so it's kind of like when you drive through town and you have somebody begging on the side of the road. They're gleaning. They're saying, "Do you have any leftovers? Do you have any change? Do you have anything that you could spare?" And I know that isn't always sometimes we get a little suspicious of whether or not they're actually needing it, or that's a whole other social issue. But that's kind of the same thing is the gleanings. And I know, Scott, you've been a part of gleanings, for many, many years, where they get that name from Ruth.
Straight from that. They take all the castaway fruit that the growers out there in the California growing region
for
produce,
peaches and stuff.
And they make it into fruit that people can use and need, and they do the same with the dried soup mix, like we do here with Mercy Meals, which is having their event coming up, and just taking what's left, giving it to those that need it.
It wouldn't be like, I think I remember you saying that this wouldn't be good enough to put on the shelf at a grocery store. We're too picky.
Oversized fruit, maybe slightly bruised, maybe split, all those different things.
Which is exactly what gleanings is. It's as the reapers are going through and they're using these scythes, to cut, they're dropping stuff, and it's like, I'll just go pick up the crumbs if I can. So it's just an interesting. I think it digs a little deeper into that aspect of the story, but I think with Ruth and Naomi, they got to care for each other. Ruth is going out saying, I got to take care of my mother-in-law. I'm going to go out and glean in the fields so I can bring back and we can make bread and grains and things like that. So it's fascinating about how family comes together around each other.
Well, and to know that, God was the one who implemented that. It's part of his word, it's part of the laws in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And it would not have been a way for, who's ever in need of that to kind of change their position in life, but it would be allowing them to survive and to get by. But then that just adds to the story when you look at Boaz goes above and beyond that in so many ways of what he asks of his workers and how to treat them. And just the fact that he even just pauses to hear the story. Like he wants to listen. You know, you talk about joining Jesus on mission. That's what Boaz is doing. Like he's listening to the story. He's trying to understand the situation that Ruth and Naomi are in. And then he's like, well, what can I do about that? And even though I didn't say it that clearly, I hope it came out. Like it was God's hand over all of this. Like Boaz is praying this prayer, this blessing, and before he knows it, like he's becoming the answer to it. I don't think he realized
that's cool.
that when he's praying it, but God's like, well, I got an answer, Boaz. It's going to be through you.
That's what's happened at Gleanings throughout their history. They've been around for like 35, 40 years and when they got started trying to tell this story of what they do, took a little time. Now they're at the point where the growers and the farmers sometimes will give them fruit that's just fine and give them equipment that they're like, okay, we don't need this truck anymore, but we know Gleanings could use this truck for their organization.
That's cool.
So it's a similar, I really see that analogy, and that's really an amazing thing how God works that way.
Go ahead if you.
Well, just then the part of the story where then Boaz invites her into this meal, then too, and that was a part. As many times as I've read Ruth, I kind of, I don't know, just forgot about that. But that the fact that then he invites her, just the fact that in his position, he's willing to sit down and eat with his workers. I mean, that says something about him too. And then he invites Ruth, this foreigner, this Moabite, to come and be a part of that. And then he's the one serving her. And again, it's just that, oh man, like that's Jesus. I mean, that's the one who came, who has every right to be served. But he's like, nope, I didn't come to be served. I came to serve.
Well, I think, when you look for Jesus in the Old Testament, you can find examples of him throughout. I mean, you look at Moses being the one leading them out of slavery. You can look at Boaz being that example of what Christ would do. And I think that really does become more clear as we start talking about the Redeemer, the kinsman Redeemer. Because what was really interesting about the story is, all right, you got to remember, it's Bethlehem, small town. Everybody knows everybody.
Everybody knows everybody.
And they're probably related in one way or another. Well, Naomi is related to Boaz, and so this is family. And Boaz asks, who is this, this woman? Well, she's the daughter-in-law of one of your relatives, Naomi. And so there is this familial. I gotta take care of family. I mean, this is a family, not family so close that again we find them coming together as husband and wife, but so not first cousins. But the idea that this is family looking after each other, and it's a beautiful example. Like you said, he invites her in for a meal. He tells his workers, drop some good stuff. Yeah. Drop some good stuff. Take it out of what your sheaths and drop good stuff. And I just think it's absolutely fantastic. And then we get into chapter 3 where the next scene is, okay, let's start making this official. And Naomi says, here's what I want you to do. This is how I want you to do it. And Ruth makes a vow. She says, again, remember in chapter 1, I think, is where you go, I'll go. Your God will be my God. Well, I'm going to do everything you say. I'm making a vow. And she follows through with it. And then we get into this next scene of this kinsman redeemer. Yeah. And even finding a little nuance in the story where Boaz is like, I'm actually not first in line. There's another relative, because there was a real understanding of how that worked, who could redeem who. And Boaz is like, there's one more ahead of me, but chill out. Let me take care of it in the morning. And it all works, of course.
Yeah. Which, not getting ahead here too much either, but when it comes to the Redeemer, just because they're in place to be the one to redeem, there still has to be a willingness to do it. And to see in the story that, it was his right in place, but he's like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But Boaz was.
Yep.
And you think about, again, God didn't have to do the things that he did for us, but the fact that Jesus was willing to step in and to be our Redeemer.
real quick on the Redeemer and seeing Jesus in here, there's actually two cases that I thought were really interesting, and I haven't looked up the translation. It's obviously Hebrew to Greek thing. I'd have to look at the Septuagint, but for both Ruth and Naomi. First, Ruth at that dinner that Boaz offered, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. Where does that come from? Where people are satisfied and there are leftovers.
Oh, feeding the 5,000. Yeah.
And then she took some to her mother-in-law, and Naomi, she also brought out and gave her what she had left over, and Naomi too was satisfied. Mm-hmm. I just thought that was interesting. I looked at the language, but I hadn't thought. I heard those words "satisfied with leftovers," and I'm like, I feel like I preached about that at some point recently. So
look at the rookie pastor here.
Wow,
He's
making some.
I'm in an Old
flexing a
Testament
little
class
bit
right
here.
now, so I'm in my lane.
This is awesome.
This is cheat
I'm
coding.
sitting back here just going, man,
Yeah, it's cheat
you're
coding.
going.
Yeah.
We got to check out the languages and
Yeah.
throwing out Septuagint out there.
I say.
This is amazing. This is great to see.
I have a professor right now who's an incredible Hebrew and Old Testament scholar / archaeologist.
Awesome.
So he's sending us to do things like that.
And it's
so
sticking.
It's actually really beautiful and fascinating. So I'm enjoying it.
Is his
Great.
name Indy?
Seriously, he's a
Short
little
for
older.
Indiana.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the latest movie,
Don't
he's
listen
Jones?
to that.
Mr. Jones?
he was at one time, I'm sure. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. He's
That's
getting up
awesome.
in age, but still blesses us each Monday night. So
No, I just I'll be bringing chapter 3 before us this next Sunday, and I just not to get out and too far ahead of myself either, but as we look at the story, and going back to what you said in the initial one, Naomi says, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara." How often do we assign ourselves a name based on our failures, based on our imperfections? Don't call me this, call me a loser or inept or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of things that we may not say it out loud.
it could be your mood in that moment.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think for her, it's a kind of a global. When I look in the mirror, I see bitterness. I see hopelessness. I see tragedy. I see heartbreak. So don't even call me my name. Just assign me this, because that's how I see myself. And the whole 4-act play, if you will, the story, reveals God saying, no, you're not. You're worth everything. You're not just a bitter person. You are. And so it's a beautiful, again, just you can almost see it if you were looking at a play structure, going through the conflict and then coming up to the triumph. And it's just, I don't know, I think it parallels how we experience life here in a lot of ways.
And I know in her statement of Boaz is caring for the living and the dead, I know she was speaking of his kin, Elimelech. Mm-hmm. But I wonder if a little bit of her was like thinking of herself as a little bit of that dead. She's kind of like trying to help Ruth out. And, because he blessed Ruth, but then also sent some to her. Just a little bit of that, like not counting herself whole, not counting herself a part of the story and the blessing. And I just wondered that a little bit. I know it's about Elimelech, but I just wondered a little bit of hers, like, wow, he's really being generous to me as well. And I'm just bitter. So he's being generous to me even in my bitterness. So I thought that was kind of interesting too.
Yeah.
So in verse 10, and I just briefly touched on this in the message, but this is where Boaz is showing kindness to her, and Ruth is, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, who's a foreigner? And that's when you get into the Hebrew and you look at the Hebrew words, there's a play on words that's being used. And so really in the literal translation, Ruth is saying, why have you noticed me, the unnoticed?
Yeah, I like that when you brought that up on Sunday.
And I think Ruth is experiencing that, and Naomi is experiencing that. And then just to see as this chapter unfolds through the kindness that's coming from God, the grace that's being shown, the favor, from Boaz to Ruth, from Ruth to Naomi, it like literally just, it changes their situation. It changes their outlook on life. It changes.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's,
Yeah.
where the next couple of chapters are going to.
Yep.
So it just keeps building. So
It does.
So 2 more chapters of Ruth, and then we're into December.
Yes.
Christmas.
And-
Our eyes
Merry
quickly
Christmas,
shift
Dustin.
to-
Everybody was laughing yesterday. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
I
But
know.
everybody, it was the laugh of like
nervous laughter.
nervous laughter.
Yeah,
is what it was.
but
Thank
it
you
is
so
coming.
much.
We have to. Yeah.
What are you, Home Depot?
They my favorite was always like, I think it was Walgreens. It would set up in like July. It's
yeah.
like
Here we go.
But but we also have Thanksgiving worship at 6:30 a week from this Wednesday. So Thanksgiving Eve.
A week from this Wednesday.
A week from this Wednesday.
Wow.
And so that's coming up.
And then turkey and football and all that good stuff.
Yeah, there we go.
But
Long
then
nap.
Advent, 3 special Advent worship services too, right?
Well, we have it on the website.
It's all there for you.
We've got it in the bulletin and things like that.
You can
So,
find it in the app too. We've got a button there. You can click. It'll take you straight to that page on the website. So
yeah, cool stuff.
Forward to it.
sounds great. Good to get together again, guys.
Absolutely.
Have a wonderful week, and hope those of you watching this enjoyed it too.
Absolutely.
Thank you.